Today. As you'll see from the title, it's a discussion on the future pain points within the organisation. So I think, as we perhaps saw on the earlier panel with Shilpa, there'll be a fair amount of perhaps crystal ball gazing here, but I'm sure with the extent and knowledge that we've got around this row of people, we'll certainly get some in-depth discussion. What I want to do first is introduce the panel. I'll get each person. So we've got a great panel here. So Gabe, can I start with you just to introduce yourself, please?
Hi there, everyone. Great to be here. And my name's Gabriel Hopkins. I'm the Chief Product Officer at Ripjar. I've been doing product stuff in that payment, fraud, FinTech area for about 20 years now. Ripjar help governments, banks, other organizations identify, prevent financial crime. And before I was here, I was with a company called FICO, who are very focused on fraud. So yeah, looking forward to discussing this topic today. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Gabe. And over to Renitha.
Good morning, everybody. My name is Renitha Singh. I'm from a very, very hot Johannesburg in South Africa. Loving the cold, not. So I work for a company called Liberty Insurance. It's one of the leading insurance companies in South Africa. Have a footprint across Africa. We're part of the Standard Bank Group, which is one of the leading banks in the country. So yeah, I've been in the financial crime space for roughly about 20 years now, mostly in banking, and then trying my hand in insurance. Still trying to learn about insurance products. I've been here for 7 years. But yeah, you know what, financial crime is financial crime everywhere you go. Thank you.
Thank you. And then Aoife, who some of you will have seen earlier, but Aoife, over to you.
Yes, thanks, Howard. Me again. My name is Aoife Doyle. I work at Fenergo, and Fenergo is a provider of client lifecycle management technology, bringing efficiencies into the KYC and AML process from onboarding and throughout the client lifecycle.
Thank you very much. And then over to you, Susan.
Yes, so good morning, everyone. So my name is Susan Symes. I work for Fidelity International, which is an asset manager. So we have both retail clients and we also administer pensions as well for employers.
Perfect. Thank you all very much. And I want to get into things very quickly, but first, just a reminder on Q&As. For those of you who were in earlier, you probably know the routine. So if you go into the Brella app, top left, and then it's the Q&A and polls tab to put your questions in there. But I think we also have 2 or 3 people with mics who will be able to prowl around the floor if anyone wants to be brave enough to ask a specific question. So we'll certainly come to that at the end as well. So the discussion today is the future financial crime and the pain points within your organisation. So looking at it from an organisational perspective and also from a technology and solutions perspective as well. So I want to get moving straight away with our first question, which is really round about forms of financial crime that are emerging today, and what do we see are the biggest threats to financial institutions? And Susan, I'll give that to you first, if that's okay.
I think the biggest issue we have at the moment is how sophisticated fraudsters are now. They are very good at focusing on their victim, and actually in many cases using their victim to actually support and commit that fraud. So push payment is a prime example of actually using the victim to actually get that payment through. I think the other challenge we have now as well, whenever we investigate cases, is sometimes the victim doesn't realise they're a victim of fraud. And so you do have an issue where you're trying to explain to someone they're a victim, and also how to protect themselves going forward. But what you tend to see more and more, certainly as a result of COVID, is that brands are being impacted. So we have a number of cases where our brand is being impacted. So, it's been put out there that we're offering better interest rates, although interest rates have gone up, interestingly. But it is a key way for fraudsters to target an individual if they're looking to save money by creating a website that looks and feels like your own, but it's designed to harvest information, harvest card details as well. And so many of those cases, they are a slow burn. So if you think you've invested into a product that is, it's going to mature in 12 months' time, your fraudster has moved on before your victim actually realises they're a victim of fraud. So it's definitely a situation that we're seeing more and more where individuals are being targeted in that manner. We also see at particular times of year that the frauds change as well. So certainly for our firm, we see instances where fraudsters take advantage of tax year end activity and advertising that firms have around perhaps use your ISA allowance, if that's a particular product that you offer, and again they try to insert themselves into that process and try and change, this is where you need to pay your money to, or try and intercept cash as it's coming into an actual institution. So it is a challenge for us to make sure we stay one step ahead. So online is obviously an issue that we have. Account takeover, trying to explain to people to be secure online. Don't have passwords across everything that you have, because that will make you more susceptible. And certainly the other thing we need to explain to people is how they can understand they've been a victim when they realise that something has happened, but also to realise that you could then find you're being targeted going forward as well. So we do spend a lot of time with clients explaining to them how to protect themselves going forward. So yes, we can move you to new account details, but what are you going to do in terms of changing your behaviour so that you don't become susceptible in the future? And be alert to a fraudster coming back and presenting themselves as your bank or your financial institution, and that they're here to help you recover any money or actually trying to help you seek compensation as well. That's another issue that we tend to find as well, is that fraudsters continually go back to the same victims over and over again.
Thank you, Susan. I think it's great bringing up so early is the whole education and awareness element of this as well as the role of entities to help educate the actual consumer's role as well to, I guess, learn from things that are going on. So thank you for that. And now just from Renitha, probably from a slightly different global view for the South African perspective.
Yeah, so when I was trying to figure out, I'm not going to give you any kind of insurance examples, but perhaps more that is South African based. So one of the biggest, I don't know what you want to call it, incidents that we faced as a country was the state capture, where there was a deliberate attempt, well, not even an attempt, it was done by this family, this famous family called the Guptas from India, who came and infiltrated basically just about every kind of state-owned entity in the country. And what's that done is created a whole lot of gaps in the country, because monies that was allocated for public benefit has now gone into literally brown paper bags, left our country via Dubai to their different bank accounts throughout the world. But apart from that, I mean, there's ongoing sabotage of our state-owned entities currently. I mean, even as I speak, in my own house, we haven't had water since Sunday, and that's because of the sabotage of the electricity grid in the country by individuals, by entities, and the repercussion that it has on everybody's everyday life. So those are the kind of things that we're seeing happening. But so in South Africa, if you look at, if you want to say, what's in season at the moment, so you have different crimes that are in season. So currently it's cash in transit heists that are very prevalent. But then our former president, Jacob Zuma, he was very instrumental in the state capture. So he was basically a man for all seasons with the crimes that were taking place. There's also a lot of transnational organized crime, where there's proliferation of small arms and weapons throughout the country itself, not only in the gang-related areas of Cape Town or Pretoria or Johannesburg. So we see there's pockets of where specific crimes take place, so not where you'd find something that's ubiquitous throughout the country itself. Then, of course, something that is specific to where our national parks are is the illicit wildlife trade that we see happening. And we all know, I mean, really, guys, rhino horns cannot do anything for you. They are more helpful for the rhinos than they are for you. Even the elephant tusks, we see being removed from the elephants themselves, and we go to the national parks quite often. So you end up seeing those rhinos without the horns. To think that that can do whatever it is you think it can do for you is just painfully ridiculous. But yeah, so that's what we find typically as emerging crimes within the country, or financial crime areas within the country itself, not necessarily specific to any particular industry, because we've seen how financial crime has a ripple effect on just about everything, whether you are in the banking industry, insurance, telecommunications, etc. There's a snowball effect. Thanks.
Perfect. Renitha, just to follow on it, probably more around the state corruption side. Is that an extending and getting worse or improving factor in South Africa?
So Howard, there was a commission set up a few years ago by the former president, who funnily enough is now doubting the legitimacy of the commission he set up himself. It's just ridiculous. So that commission ended the latter part of 2021. Last year saw the commission release their reports. I think there's in excess of 40,000 names that we had to troll through to determine whether any of those individuals or entities were in our books as clients, that we did an exercise internally. So what we're seeing right now is corruption charges being leveled against them. There's been series of court cases, convictions being made. Whether the bigwigs or the big chiefs of those particular instances, whether they will see the light of day in a court of law is another thing. Like the two Gupta brothers at the moment, we are waiting for the extradition from Dubai to South Africa has been agreed, but they're still languishing in a jail in Dubai while some of the related corruption cases are being tried out in South Africa. So we do definitely see something happening. Of course, I think like any other country, the wheels of justice are extremely slow.
Painfully slow.
Terribly.
Thank you. Gabe, is there anything you wanted to bring in on that question?
Just a couple of quick things. I'd really underline what Susan said in terms of when it comes to the impact of financial crime on individuals. I think 5-6 years ago, maybe a little longer, we saw a real transformation from fraud being something that happens to people to something where fraud is something that people do to themselves almost, and that change. And certainly the scams have become more and more sophisticated, less technological and more sophisticated at the same time. And it's sort of deeply heartbreaking when someone is insisting, no, I really want to pay this money to my son, to get him out of trouble, and you've got to try and convince him that he's getting defrauded. I think just to flip the question slightly, take a different perspective, we're asking about the impact on financial institutions and banks, and I think one of the trends over the last few years is that it's become much more difficult from a regulatory point of view for banks to stay ahead of the curve in terms of the compliance obligations they're under. Really important compliance obligations that they're under, and elements like money laundering, which have been going on all the way through, but now there's a greater expectation on financial institutions that they're going to be able to identify that and stop that. And so I do think that's had a major impact from a financial institution perspective on their day-to-day lives.
Thanks, Gabe. I'm going to move us on because we've got questions coming through as well, so don't forget to post them on from the audience, please. So I think this was touched on again in one of the earlier panels, is about the customer experience, so looking at it from a consumer lens as well. So if we're looking at how should financial institutions balance the need for tighter controls, see we might sway into regulations there as well, with their ever-increasing expectations from customer experience. And Aoife, I'll start with you on that one, please.
Well, I certainly think it is a tightrope to balance both the customer expectation and the regulatory demands that are placed upon financial institutions. And I think if we look to the technical ecosystem that exists in a financial institution and assess how is that going to cater to the front-end experience of the customer and the regulatory compliance ask of the individual regulator in the jurisdiction in which you operate. I think we see that an awful lot of investment is placed in the front-end experience. So the nice website, the portal where you have a very seamless experience of entering in your name and date of birth, etc. Any concerns around, of course, a mimicked website being put aside for one moment. But when we know that that data goes into the system, we might say that the customer experience has been quite pleasant. It has been quite straightforward. But when it hits the back-end systems or the internal systems within the institution, we see that they can be quite fragmented, and you've got pockets of data sitting in multiple different systems. And what that leads to is a piece where maybe you can tick the box and say the customer experience has been satisfied, but when it comes to the regulator paying a visit or supervisors stepping in to see where the compliance controls have been applied, it's a scramble to pull that information across multiple systems. So I think the key in getting a balance between the two is by all means a continued investment in the front-end customer applications. We are all customers ourselves, and if we saw that they had fallen apart from the digital experience that we get elsewhere, but it's integrating those front-end pieces into the regulatory and compliance systems. And also then, with a more integrated ecosystem, you can adapt to regulatory change. So regulatory change may be applied once, and then it is applicable across all domains of the organisation.
So in a way, I think it's rather than perhaps the term we're using here, which is about tighter controls, is probably a cleverer placing of the controls and a better use of your data to inform that control. Yeah, perfect, thank you. Susan, anything you'd want to add on that one?
No, I would agree. I think the challenge that we have is that, especially when it comes to payments, is that customers expect their money now. They expect it instantly. If they're moving money from one bank to another, they expect to actually see that that's happened. And if it doesn't happen instantly, then there's what's going wrong. But that plays perfectly into the hands of a fraudster that wants to see that money move on quite quickly as well. So it is that trade-off that, especially if you're investigating a fraud, you need to slow the process down. But that is going to upset a customer. And there is that constant trade-off that, and this probably sounds really harsh, personal opinion now, I would probably sleep well upsetting a genuine customer. I can live with that. I'm not going to sleep well if I allow something to go out the door to a fraudster, full disclosure. So slowing it down is that challenge in terms of, can I slow this down enough? Can I be convincing enough to explain why I'm slowing this down? Because I might have to go to the National Crime Agency if I'm UK and actually slow that process down. So we need to be conscious of that piece, definitely.
I think it's a fascinating take. We talk quite extensively about the regulator being a bit of a blocker for us and telling us to do things. But I think with payment friction, should we say, financial institutions actually generally are accepting of that. And as you say, Susan, I think it creates the ability to investigate, whereas the payment systems regulation drives the need to get that out within 2 hours. So I think there's a contention a different way than perhaps we traditionally see.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think the key thing as well, for any firm, if you are being targeted, is you have to be disruptive when it comes to a fraudster. Yeah. The more disruptive you are, the less attractive you become to a fraudster, and they will look elsewhere. But there is that trade-off. How do you balance that customer relationship as a result?
Gabe, anything, looking at it from a tech side as well, because I think technology is quite important to play here. Anything to add in relation to the tech view?
Yeah, I almost feel this is a bit like the game show QI, where the clanger goes off. So I'm going to say it, but it's definitely a hot topic and maybe one that has a bit too much buzz. But machine learning, AI, are the tools that make sense here because they give you the ability to bring the data together to make really strong decisions very, very quickly for the customer. In the case of the regulator, often, as you say, that they're pushing for payments to be quicker and quicker and quicker. And so without hiring thousands and thousands of people, the way to make that work from a fraud point of view, from a compliance point of view, even from a sort of post-incident investigation, is to work out how you can use AI to tackle those problems. And I would just, caution people who are getting into this for the first time or sort of starting on this journey, just to be cautious about some of the hype that's in there. But certainly, we've seen technology do really transformational things to be able to get people to make better decisions. And it's always going to be that balance of security and convenience. And from a fraud point of view, there's always going to be a balance of, I know I'm going to have to let through a number of fraudulent payments in order not to inconvenience the customers. But, use those tools that are out there, find the tools that work for other people and use those in your arsenal to make sure you've got that right balance of policy and technology.
Thank you. I'm going to go off script now, sorry guys. I'm going to jump to an audience question because it's really, really quite insightful on some of the stuff that we've talked about. So the question here is that one of the biggest issues we see with eKYC and eDIV solutions is identification of UBOs with multiple layers of corporate ownership. How do you see this issue being tackled and what solutions are there? So Aoife, you're really surprised I'm coming to you, aren't you, on that one?
Yes, I mean, I think unraveling or unwrapping the corporate structure is a challenge, and the bigger the structure, the more it can be hidden. And indeed, various regulators will take the thresholds very, very low. In some instances, it is certainly a balance to identify even the 25% threshold, but going down and down into 10%, 2% really does make that a lot harder. I think conveniently there is technology solutions that can answer that. And I think looking to it is saying, can you leverage a rules-based approach which tells a person who is tasked with this role, this is what you need to identify for the jurisdiction that the entity is doing business with, would be first all. The second piece is looking to see where data can be reused. Have you identified these relationships in other areas of the institution, or indeed for other relationships that they might have? So reusing that data and minimizing the amount of ID&V that needs to be done. It is by no means an easy ask, and I think every onboard or review process, when it hits the UBO unraveling, it does need an element. We can say, yes, of course, you can source data from registry information. It really needs the trained and practiced eye to say, actually, I think in this instance, I need to go one level deeper. I need to do some investigation offline. So I think it's an area where technology is very much complementary in that it will assist with identifying who needs to be identified in the corporate structure, where you need to apply ID&V, but it does still need that trained resource to say, have I gone far enough, or have I identified all of the risky actors, as it were, in this company?
Perfect, thank you. And one other one that we've got from the floor is I think it's hugely topical, is about skills and potential skills shortages in the type of skills that are required for economic crime prevention. So I think perhaps on that one, Renitha, any thoughts on skills, perhaps development of skills for the future that we need within the fighting crime area?
You know, so I've got, like I mentioned earlier, I've got practically 20 years of experience of working within the financial crime industry in South Africa. And there's just no accounting for experience across the various industries. So I have had the benefit of working for the regulator in the country, as well as in the insurance, banking, telecoms industry. So you get to understand the nuances that are specific to each of the different types of industries. But I think, of course, now with, like Susan mentioned earlier, about how the fraudsters are becoming that much more smarter and how you have to be able to cater for them, there's just no, you just can't count out the technical skills that are required. And Aoife's alluded to that as well just now. The skills that you need, I mean, unfortunately, you can't only rely on the human being to be able to pick up trends or typologies, etc. You have to be able to rely on the technology that is available there, and you have to have trained eyes to be able to pick up that information that the technology is bringing out. Because I am the least tech-savvy person you will find, probably in our country. But when I screen or scan the newspapers and things, I'm able to pick up things like that, and that comes from training. So you can have all of that information in front of you, even the information that comes via the absolutely smart machines that we have. But if you don't have that technical competence of the individual to be able to read the room or read the information, then that falls flat. So it's a combination of having that technical competence of the individual in terms of the savvy that they have, but at the same time bringing in what the machine is giving you as well. So I think that collaboration between the two is significant.
Yeah, perfect. And Gabe, one again that's come from the floor, which is around, rather than the people skills, do you think we're ever going to get to a position where technology, data, and I guess automation will near enough eradicate the need for the human touch?
It's a sort of really interesting question. Who knows with technology? I think making predictions there is a bit of a challenge. But certainly, the predictions that have been made over the last 20 years haven't come to fruition yet. So I think it's probably a long way out. I think as someone working in the fraud, financial crime, compliance space, one of the best things to do, and I'm sure you've done this many times, is to go and sit with a fraud analyst or compliance analyst and watch them work. Because there's a real sort of sixth sense when you look at a case or you have an interaction with a customer about whether or not they're a fraudster or not, that the technology just doesn't give you. So I work for a technology vendor, and we think that the technology does do amazing things, but no, I think there's always going to be the place for skilled people working in those environments to help guide those technologies and to make sure they stay on track. At least for, there's been some really interesting things with chat CGT and all those things over the last few months that I think have made people think, oh my God, the technology does amazing things, but it's still, you can still see the flaws in it very clearly. And in something like financial crime, that's one of the problems. And in fact, compliance is one of the areas which has been, for all sorts of good and bad reasons, has been the laggard in taking on some of these technologies because people don't want to trust everything to the computer. So I think that, we'll see that adoption first.
I think everyone feels very relieved here that they've got jobs for life, from the sounds of it.
So, for the next 30 years.
Well, yeah, 30 years. Okay, we'll go for that. That sounds good enough. So now, this is probably picking on a point that was that Amir raised on the earlier panel as well, which is around collaboration. So it's a question around how can collaboration between companies and public bodies help to tackle financial crime? And Renitha, I think you brought up probably that public body bit as well, if you wouldn't mind picking that one up first, please.
Yeah, sure. So Howard, earlier I spoke about the state capture and the impact that it had on South Africa, and I think that is the worst kind of example that you can give on a public-private collaboration. Because what had happened in the country, it was 9 years of that state capture, but we're still seeing the after effects of it, the aftershocks, actually, not after effects. So that is, like I said, the example of how not to collaborate in the public-private sphere. And so much so that South Africa, because of the way the leadership in the country had managed the corruption that was taking place, South Africa finds itself having to, well, we will know next month whether we're going to be placed on the grey list with FATF. Of course, we know the impact of being placed on a grey list. It initially started out as being a possibility. It's moved to a likelihood, despite all of the efforts made by the government in recent months to pass legislation, to make some changes within the bigger financial industries, etc. Fingers crossed, we don't know what is going to happen, but we anticipate that it will. And when it does, it's about how we get off that list that much quicker. Having said that, it's not all that bad about public and private collaboration. We're seeing that happen in our country as well, where our Minister of Justice recently announced where they received private funding from a conglomerate in respect of prosecutions, to assist in prosecutions and investigations. Our National Prosecuting Authority and all of the ancillary institutions that are with it are hard-pressed for not only resources, but funding to be able to put that time and effort into investigations, because as we know, financial crime is very complex, and we don't necessarily have that level of skill within the prosecuting authority to be able to analyze the high volume of transactions, or even have the systems that will make that analysis smarter. So definitely we're seeing that happening. In addition to what's happening within the NPA, we also have It's an institution called SAMLET. It's a South African Money Laundering Integration Task Force. It's a collaboration between predominantly the banks in the country and the regulator, where it's basically a think tank, if you want to put it that way, but with a think tank with deliberate action plan in terms of how to address the problems that the country is currently facing. So that is definitely something that we see has a very, very positive effect on the country itself, where there's a joint collaborative effect to address, to assist in the prosecutions, to put the resources together, to put the systems together, to, where they are able to work at a more operational and strategic levels, rather than just the government trying to do something on their own, because we know that is never going to happen single-handedly. And the fact that the government has made itself open to address these issues and bring in the private sector to assist shows an appetite to want to resolve the issues that the country is facing. Because let's face it, the man on the street doesn't know about that. All they understand is that, yes, our interest rates was also increased. We don't have water, we have rolling blackouts, we have load shedding, schedules jump up and down the entire day, sometimes 8 hours without electricity in a day, in a country where you have brilliant sunshine, harness the resources. That's a story for another day. But all they see is the negative consequences, and it's up to those at the higher echelons of the country to be able to put together concrete plans to be able to address these issues for the common man in the street, for those that are languishing at the bottom end of the LSM, etc., to assist them, but also the country at large, because this is also impacting on the reputation of the country. I mean, we have lots of road shows that our finance ministry goes around the world with the begging bowl, asking for everybody to invest in the country. But who would want to invest in a country where you are on a FATF grey list? So that speaks volumes about what our reputational internationally is. But there's also, like I said, the appetite to want to change that. And we are hoping that the inner political fighting that we see taking place with our leading party currently, will take the back seat, and there's more focus on what is required for the country itself. And definitely, yes, the steps that are being taken between the public enterprises or the public institutions and the private sector will definitely see a spin for the positive for the country.
I think what I love with that as well, Renitha, is the fact that it's actually the public sector that seemed to be driving some of that as well in the first instance, rather than the private sector pushing for it, which is good.
Absolutely. So, like I said, with our previous leadership, I mean, it was all about me, and what can I get from a particular tender, and if so much money is allocated to a particular project, then how much of it can I feed off? That's significantly changed, because we have in our current president a leader who is, he's got his own money, really. So public money he's not interested in. And I think while that may play a role in how he is viewing the country, I think he's got his heart in the right place in trying to make things better for the country. And I think his voice is a right tone from the top. And again, it's not all of the public institutions in the country that are driving this. There are those pockets of excellence that we have, and that one particular one is our Ministry of Justice that is definitely driving the future for us.
And probably just a little bit of a different build on this is thinking about the holy grail of being able to share data and strategic intelligence in public-private partnerships. Because I think historically, for me, there's quite a lot of talk about typologies, red flags, but the stumbling point seems to be about how do we share data. So Gabe, it'd be interesting perhaps just to get your slant on that and perhaps how we can navigate that dichotomy.
Yeah, so it's interesting thinking about what the blockers are. As you say, often you hear GDPR as a blocker, whereas actually GDPR has got a number of very clear carve-outs for fraud, financial crime, and criminal activity. I think another thing that goes on here is there's quite a different culture sometimes between some of the intelligence policing organizations and the banks that they work with. Obviously, you're involved with Cifas. I think we all intuitively feel that the public-private partnerships can be powerful, and private-private partnerships can be really powerful. What we see is those organizations, policing organizations, do want to bring the private companies in. And what you need to do that is a really strong security model so that you're only sharing data that people are allowed to see, so you're avoiding some of those challenges down the line. So again, there's technology solutions that enable you to do that without tripping over, but I think, you know, some of it is pure political will. We've seen some really good initiatives before, and no, maybe this is controversial, but maybe this could actually, in this country at least, be a bit of a Brexit dividend, that we have the ability to set some of these things up in a way that's been challenging before. Certainly, I think it would bring huge benefit.
Perfect. Thank you. I think one of them, because we swayed on to FATF, I think you brought FATF into the conversation, is I think it's always fascinating with FATF because there's not many risk areas where you've got a global standard that people work to, and there's a fear of going on the grey list, isn't there? It's something that, as you were saying, Renitha, it stops investment potentially in your country. So, Aoife, I just want to come to you perhaps with a view on that. Is how do you see the importance of FATF, and do you think, as a set of global standards, it has a future?
I think undoubtedly it will continue to have a future in terms of, firstly, the respect that it is given as an institution. It is held in very high regard, and I think its findings, when positive for a country, are obviously very beneficial, but maybe to your example, Renitha, when you're teetering on the brink of maybe moving to a grey list, it may bring in a certain number of controls that, while you can't prevent the grey list in this review cycle, you can certainly lay the foundations to improve it over time. I think across the whole area of financial crime, institutions such as FATF that are taking more of a global view certainly help to make it a more cohesive process end to end. And it's that piece of looking at how many jurisdictions are we doing business with in the world, and if you're looking to investigate and review each individual regulator's risk-based approach, the analysis overhead is huge and it's colossal. So while FATF certainly doesn't replace it, their guidance will certainly assist to say this is the direction of travel that you would take. So I think maybe, let's just say, the role of institutions such as FATF will only grow in a more integrated society. And certainly if we were, again, maybe with the crystal ball piece, if we were able to crack that piece of truly sharing the right data globally, you're going to bring down potentially the FinCrime exposure that you would have, but you do need those strong global bodies to act as the captains of the ship, as it were, to be able to steer everyone ahead on how to do it in a more cohesive way.
Perfect, thank you. And some real insights, I think, on that question around so many different facets of information sharing, public-private partnerships and the regulator. I'm going to just jump on to one of the questions from the floor again, and I'm going to pose this to you, Susan, just so you're ready for it coming over. It's about, does financial crime affect a certain demographic more than another? And how should we increase awareness against customers to prevent victimisation?
Crikey. I think different demographics are targeted in different ways. So I think if you are quite keen on using a particular app for crosswords, for example, you might see adverts that come up that are actually being placed there by fraudsters that take you off down a path that you unwittingly go down. There are other types of frauds. If you, and I'm going to, as I say this, it's going to be obvious that it's not something I do, but if you enjoy being out on a Friday night, how careful are you with your mobile device? Could you unwittingly find that you lose track of that device and you haven't got good controls around it, and suddenly everything on your phone is in the hands of someone you don't want to have access to that information? So I think when any firm looks at its client base, it's probably worth, if you haven't already, stepping back and saying, for each demographic, how could they be targeted when it comes to fraud? And what controls do we have in place to disrupt and prevent as much as possible those groups being targeted? And do you have any particular group of clients that could span more than one method being used by a fraudster? So I think it really does depend, because you could, to the earlier example, if you receive a WhatsApp message, "Hi, Mum, I really need £100," and you automatically say, "Okay, let me send that to you." You know, that is a way of targeting someone, because fraudsters push out that many messages. They will hit across a parent who's going to look at that and think, actually, I need to help my child out. And I think intrinsically we don't stop and think, is this genuine? And that's something that we all need to be better at. So I think it really depends on the group. Some people are more susceptible because of their age, and they might have saved and have more in life savings. So it's a particular type of fraud that you would put towards that group, as opposed to someone who's much younger, that maybe there's another method that would need to be used, and maybe it might be a Friday night scenario and you haven't got good controls around your mobile phone. So it really depends on each group.
Thanks, Susan. And the minute you said, your devices, actually touched my pocket to check I still had it. I thought, it hadn't dropped out somewhere, has it? But no, I think what you're saying is it's not a one-size-fits-all on this.
Yeah,
the actual threats are different, and you've got to be able to tailor and be agile to hit the right population.
Yeah. And also as well, for each demographic, how does that change during the year as well? So Black Friday is a prime example where fraudsters are particularly active. So again, looking at your client base and your demographic, how could they be targeted at different times of the year as well, so that you don't have a one-size-fits-all, but throughout the year, if you look at your year, what are you trying to do in terms of advertising new products? What opportunities does that create for fraudsters as well? Those things need to be continually reassessed each year.
Great, thanks, Susan. Probably one now that we haven't touched on too much. We've talked probably around some front-end fraud detection controls, but not necessarily about investigation processes, so probably more around the back end. So, Gabe, it'd be interesting to probably get your view on this one around what can firms do to improve their detection and investigation processes.
Yeah, so I mean, sort of two sides of the same activity in a way, but it is the difference between the security guard and the detective. I think, honestly, in both cases, data is really key, but in very different ways. So when we're talking about fraud detection, about finding something in the moment and stopping it, that's a challenging activity that we sort of touched on before in terms of AI, but really the contextual data is super important. So what do I know about this individual? A lot of the time that behavioral patterns will really make a defining difference. We know that people shopping at taking money out of their regular ATM or shopping at a regular shop, Amazon, whatever it might be, is hundreds of times less likely to be fraudulent than something out of that pattern. We always used to come across the sort of CEO's daughter or son problem, though, because those people tended to have weird shopping patterns, and you got a phone call saying, "Why have you blocked this transaction?" But generally, that behavioral data will give you that guidance, and you can use that whether or not using AI or not, because that data will tell you. When it comes to investigations, we see sort of sophisticated financial services organizations and others really sort of migrating to more sophisticated techniques. So what we see as really great best practice is bring all of your data together into a single view where you can see that, whether or not that's alerts coming from all of your fraud, compliance, downstream systems. Bring that into some sort of knowledge base where you can augment it, so where people doing investigations can add their findings into that knowledge base so that you have that organizational knowledge going forward, and then carry out investigations using all of those automation tools, AI tools, to make sense of that data. And that's much more of the challenge is bringing data together in one place, but those organizations that have been able to do that see massive benefits from that.
I think it's so spot on, because it reminds me of some wise sage advice that I got a few years ago, which was look inside internally first before necessarily going outside. It's amazing how many organizations don't utilize their own data effectively because of legacy systems, the inability to call and pull data together. So I think, it was always a bit of advice that I thought was quite useful, is look in-house first, see how you can use your own data first before necessarily embarking on huge spending sprees for a lot of other bits of information. I think we're near enough come to the end, so I'll quickly just jump to the floor. Is there any questions specifically on the floor? Any brave hands? Oh, we've got one towards the back there.
Thanks a lot for the insight shared. I'm particularly interested in the use of technology, AI, ML. A whole lot has been said about these platforms. But then looking at the context of Africa, I know most of the AML crimes committed are due to poverty, lack of money, and then when these money pressures come, people try to look for other means to see how to make ends meet and pay the bills. So why these are not, it's not morally justifiable, but it's something I think should be looked into. And now we see AI. Most people are either underemployed or unemployed in Africa, and then with AI coming up, with so much speed, yeah, Simon and Gabriel rather hinted that humans will still be relevant, but we know that in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years, most of the jobs done by humans will be taken over by these automated machines. And so that places even more pressure on the economic landscape back in Africa. Then I can only imagine what the money laundering crime can look like in the future. So my question is, beyond the scope of AI fighting crime, which is fine, what about the root cause of unemployment, poverty? And then what can AI do? Can AI even create jobs? Can it create jobs? At least, can it do something to see that these crimes are not proliferated with time because of a lack of finances for people, which pushes them into committing some of these crimes? Thank you.
Thank you. Renitha, do you want to have a stab at that? No, probably around the unemployment side and pushing people into crimes does the environment and the economy of a country create criminality? Is perhaps the way I saw that.
Yeah, it's similar to the question that Susan had answered earlier, whether there's any specific demographic that financial crime impacts. So yes, absolutely, poverty is one of those social evils that does contribute to the crime in the country. But I can't say hand on heart that is, yes, about the only single factor that impacts financial crime. It's throughout the strata. We've had the biggest kind of scams that you would find in South Africa with Steinhoff, where Christo Visser and Marcus Juster, who were two individuals, I think more Marcus Juster, let me not take the wrong name, the other guy was the innocent one, but who fiddled with his books, basically presenting a false picture of the finances of the company. Then we've got Tongaat Hewlett's, who's one of the bigger entities as well, presenting false profit statements, etc. So there's a place for financial crime compliance, I think, across the spectrum. You can't necessarily say it is only the poverty is the single most contributing factor. For sure, it is significant in the bigger scheme of things, but I wouldn't necessarily say that it is the biggest contributing factor. But obviously, if you look at it, consolidatedly, yes, a lot of it is through the poverty, having the scams that take place, the fraudulent scams that take place, the 419 scams, etc., that we've seen prevalent over the years. Those are all, well, some of them are people who are already rich wanting to get richer, but a lot of it is also those who are poor and for the lack of resources of their own, try to take on the resource of others. So, you know what, whether AI can contribute jobs, I am absolutely not the person to answer that question. But I can tell you, of course, that I think there is the objective of every single government in the world to eradicate poverty, to increase employment. So it's one of those social evils that we have, actually, unemployment. But that's being utopic to think that we can solve for that. Anytime soon, not anytime soon. Thanks.
Thanks. We have got a big time up here, but Gabe's got something really quick, I think.
I feel like I should defend AI a little bit. It's quite interesting. If you ever read books from like the 1960s in America, people are obsessed with the fact that the robots are going to change the economy, and that's going to be the end of the American economy. I think there's something similar going on here. So I don't know your economy, your society, so I don't want to speak to those challenges. But we do know that London's full of AI, companies doing AI, and it's never had such high employment. So I'm not sure that those two things go quite hand in hand. And I would just underline one of the points here is absolutely, some of the people who are committing those frauds are people who really need the money, and that's a big moral issue. But I would say predominantly fraud is conducted by organized criminal groups, and the people who are taking the money out of this don't need the money, and so if we could target it, if we could tune the AI in a particular way, I would want to stop those guys who are responsible for a lot of the other big problems in society, like human trafficking and drug dealing and those things. And I think that's still a worthwhile use of our technology.
Thank you. We're going to have to draw a close there, sorry. But we'll all be around later. I'm sure you'll be able to pick us up in the break. So firstly, a huge thank you to Richard and the organisers of the event today, and to the panel, to Susan, to Aoife, to Renitha, and to Gabe as well. And if we can just say our appreciations in the usual way, please.